This is a continuation of our TilingTextures inside of ZBrush series, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at how we take our sculpt and turn this into actual geometry that we can use inside of a game engine or any other kind of setting. So we've already got our sculpt here. In the other videos we talked about this special kind of setup that we have here with our poly frame, to where we can just hold down Control and Shift and then click on that part of the model here that you see. And now that we have this piece of geometry isolated the way that we do, it's going to be real easy for us to just delete everything else that we don't need. So I'm going to turn off the poly frame so we can just see the piece of geometry that we want to work with. And we're going to go to geometry and we can say delete lower subdivision, and I do have a higher one. I'm going to delete that as well. And then I'm going to go to modify topology, and there's a delete hidden right here. So you hit this button and it's going to delete hidden. If we have those subdivision levels on there, it might cause problems, and it might tell you that you can't delete hidden unless you delete the subdivision levels. So no big deal on that. So now we have our piece of geometry that we want to export out of the program. Let's just take a real quick look and see what is the actual poly count that we're working with. So we've got over 400,000 polys on this piece of geometry, which is not that super high. So we can go ahead and export this thing out as an OBJ. So I'm going to hit export like this, and I'll go to the OBJ folder that I have, and I'll just call this high res like this, and I'll call it no deci for no Decimation Master, and we're going to take a look at that real quick. So I'm going to go ahead and save that like this, because I can actually take this high-res piece of geometry and I can put it into some other program like XNormal or Substance Designer, all these different programs where you can bake out normal maps and AO and everything else like that. That would allow me to go in other programs and bake out that information if I want. We've already made a lot of those maps inside of ZBrush from the earlier videos, so it depends on where you want to make that stuff at, but that's how you can kind of kick this thing out. The next thing I'm going to do is go to the Z plugin, and I'm going to dock that. So I just click this little icon here, and it's going to send it over here, and I'm going to load up Decimation Master. So I'm going to start to decimate this model and reduce it down to a very low level. So I'm going to click the pre-process current button on there, and it's going to analyze the mesh and go through this process. Depending on how many polys you have, it could take a while, but you saw that bar up top here just go across really quickly. So it's already kind of figured out what it needs to do to reduce this thing, and now we can start dropping it down to the poly count that we're looking for. So we got this percentage thing. We could drop it down to 50% and say decimate current, and you might not even see a change in this until you turn on the poly frame, and then you can see how it's starting to reduce this thing like that. And then we could take it down to 10% like this, click decimate current, and you can see we're getting lower and lower like this. But if we want a specific target count for polys on here, we could do this in thousands of polys. So if I wanted this thing to be, let's say 1,000 polys, I could put it on 1K like this, and you can see it's going to change this percent of decimation. And I'll say decimate current. And so this is kind of what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a really low representation of this thing that we're going to go push into like a game engine, and we'll use this with the normal map, and it will actually look pretty good. Now, it tore up the corners. We're going to fix that in another program. I'm not such a big fan of how low this thing is, so I'm going to just put it on 2 for 2,000 polys, and then say decimate current. And I think that looks like a little bit better shape for that. So we can go ahead and export that thing out, and we can call this special tile geo. This is game res. I'll just put this on here like this real quick, and call this deci for decimated. So I'll save that out like this. So that's a possibility. The other thing you can do is, if you have GoZ enabled with one of your applications, I'm going to click this, and it's going to send it over to Maya for us. And so this is the scene that we were working with before, and you can see how it's going to place this thing in the correct position that we had on our model that we had before. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. I'm going to hide it, and here's what we are working with. Now, the next thing I need to do is make sure that this thing actually tiles as geometry. So what I'm going to do to fix this thing up, I'm going to go ahead and select this thing, and I'm going to go Edit, Duplicate Special, and I'll use the option box for this. Instead of making a copy, I'll make an instance. So let me just reset the settings. I had some scale stuff on there. So go ahead and make an instance of this, and I'll hit Apply. And so it's going to make a copy for us. I'll put on the Move tool, and then I'll move it off to the side here like this, and then I'll snap to my grid, hold down X, and I should be able to snap in grid increments like this. So we can see what's going on here. We have this geometry, and it's not quite lining up on a vert for vert basis, and that's what we need. We need this thing to match up vert for vert, so you might have to do a little bit of work to take these verts that you see here and align them. Before I do that, I'm going to do this real quick, where I'm going to hide this. I'm going to turn on my grid. I'm going to go to more of a top view like this. I'll just tap F, and I'm going to grab any verts that are along here, and I'll just automatically snap them to the grid. So hold on X, I'll drag this over with this axis, hold on X, and it'll snap to this here. If I grab this whole row of verts like this, I can move this and snap it to a grid line here. And if yours is not snapping in a straight line like this, and it's snapping to the grid, and there's like some kind of wave pattern to it or something, it's probably because you have some kind of setting set up in your Move tool. It's a default option in Maya where you have this retain component spacing, so I always turn that off. I don't know why that's a default, but it is. So I always turn that thing off, and then after that, you can just snap everything nice and straight to your grid. So I'm going to take this piece here, hold on, sorry, not VX. I'll snap this here and then here. So that doesn't look like it's a good piece of vert to grab there. So let me just go ahead and snap this like this here. I'm gonna have to move this out just a little bit. So it is just a little bit of work to get this stuff cleaned up. So I'll just keep working my way around the model. I just need to be a little bit careful about some of the geo that's on here if I snap it to the edge, but we'll just try to run through this thing a little bit quick. So this is kind of like some of the area that I'm just a little bit concerned about, these verts, how they might get so close to each other. But I'll just keep running through and snap that up like this here, and I'll take this and pull it to the corner and push it up. You can see I'm snapping this axis and this axis, that way it doesn't I'm not getting any kind of weird movement in any other axis other than these two here. So I'll grab that, hold on X, grab these, hold on X, and then snap. And might actually really need a poly on that thing. So hit F8, shift right click, and say append to polygon. So I can click here, click a point, hit enter like that. I'll hit F9 and just snap to the grid right there. Okay, and that's looking better. We'll snap this up right here. Okay, just like this. Okay, so I think that's looking pretty good right there. And I'll go to my outliner, open that up. So again, Windows, Outliners, take a look here, and then this is the hidden one that I have, so I'm going to select it, hit Control H. And I don't want this hard edge normals that came in with the program from pulling it over. So I'll select the geometry and go to polygons, go to normals, and soften the edge on that. And let's turn off the grid. Don't want to see that right now. And here's where this was kind of a problem area right in through here. So I need to kind of figure out what's going on with the geo. And it looks like I don't really want this poly right here. That's kind of causing some issues. And I'll take this and snap it to this thing here. Now you can see if we've got verts right here and there's no geometry on this side, we need to go ahead and fix that up. So I'm going to select this one, hold down Shift and right click and use the multi-cut tool, and I can just cut right to here and hit Y or G for my last command, or enter to you know, finish out that tool. And now I could select these verts that we've got here and just hold down V, and I can snap it to this vert right here. So now these things are lining up. Okay, and I can do the same. It just depends. Do I move this vert or that vert? I don't think it really matters. They're pretty close together. So let's just do this through here. And you can see, because I'm using an instance, whenever I move verts on this one, it's actually moving verts on this one as well. They're basically like mirror copies of each other, where if you move this one, it moves this one as well. So that's how we can kind of use that to our advantage to make sure that we are making geometry that snaps up on both sides. Because if we move this one and move this vert to match this, then we're matching it up to both copies. So it's going to move this here, snap this like that. And I did see we need to add some geometry right here. So I'm going to shift right click, multi-cut tool, and cut across here like that. Hit F9 like this. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to finish this out, this process that you see, and I'm also going to make a copy like this and go edit, duplicate special again, and then this time I need to fix everything to where it tiles this way as well, and all the geo lines up for that. So you can see what we've got here. I'm just going to put the video in a time-lapse mode and go ahead and finish this part out. Alright, here we are after taking everything and snapping it all together, and it looks like everything's good. I'm just going to do a check over the geometry real quick and see if I see anything that looks kind of odd, just because sometimes when you use Decimation Master, it does a really nice job, but sometimes it makes some geometry that is not the best. So you just need to go through and kind of see if there's any kind of real bad problem. Sometimes I just get some weird overlapping geometry. It looked like most of that existed toward the outer edge, and I fixed that up by straightening some things up. So you know, you could go through this and even optimize, and you know, a lot of these different polys aren't necessarily needed with inside of here, but you know, I can go ahead and let that live. I do see some really thin triangles like this thing that you see here, and it really doesn't serve too much of a purpose. There is a tool that I like to use when it works, this target weld. If I put it on there and click on this vert and move it over here, it'll weld it up. I just need to make sure I'm only picking that and nothing else. So you can see, and now that makes a triangle here that I probably don't really need. And again, I'm starting to get into some very nitpicky stuff, but I'd really only want to clean up some areas that I think might cause some issues, but I think that's looking pretty good. The other thing that we need to do is take a look at the UVs. So the UVs do get a bit distorted. I think I forgot to check a box on the Decimation Master where you can keep the UVs. So if you want to keep the UVs on that stuff, you can turn that on and use that. But since I forgot to do that, this is not a big deal for what we're doing, because basically we just have a flat projection going straight down the model. So let's just open up the UV texture editor window and take a look at the horrible UVs that we have, and we got just a triangle right now. That's obviously not going to work for us. So I'm just going to zoom in here and get this to where we can take a look at it. So all we got to do is go to create UVs, do planar mapping, go to the option box, and then I'm going to do project from the Y axis, which if I move this out of the way, you can see this is the axis that we want to project down on. Go ahead and hit apply. And then we've got our UVs on here, and we should be good to go. Because these other models are instances of this, it's going to fix everything up for us and should look pretty good. I want to check this real quick here, and so I'm going to select those verts, tap F, and then zoom out a little bit. So I guess that looks okay. I guess there shouldn't be any issues with that. Just to check everything, what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate special again, like this. And this time I'm going to snap a copy here, do it again, hit a duplicate special, Control Shift D, hold down X, snap to my grid, snap this here like that, and then make a copy of this, hold down X and snap it over here, make a copy of this, Control D, hold down X, snap it over here, same thing here. And I'm just building a grid pattern so we can check all of this. And I want to select everything except for this piece, and I'm going to convert these instances into actual geometry. So you can go to modify, convert, and there should be an instance to object like that. And then now these should be regular objects. I can delete history, Alt Shift D like that. And let's turn off the poly frame on this. So I'm going to turn that off right here like this, and we will get this this shading issue that we have here. So I'm just going to combine all these into a group, select them all, hit Control G, and just call this build group TilingGEO like that. And now I can duplicate this whole group, hit Control D, and I'll hide this one up here, Control H. And now I have all this geometry, and I want to combine this all together. So we'll just go to Mesh, Combine all those pieces together, Control D to delete the history on it. And we can merge all the vertices for this. So I'll just select this piece of geometry, hit Control F9 to convert object into all vert selection, and then shift right click, merge vertices option box, and give it a really low threshold of something like 0.001, hit apply, and it should merge all those verts together. Now we should be able to go to normals and soften edge, and if we did everything correctly, which looks like maybe there's a problem with some of the normals on here, select this and go to normals, unlock normals. And let's go to normals, oops, not harden edge, soften edge, like this. We shouldn't have these issues. So that's telling me that there is still some problems with this, and I did miss a few little points on here. So I need to go back and just sew these things up. I could do this and do display polygons, custom polygon display, and go to border edges like this, and I could right click on here and say vertex, just say merge vertices to center to merge all those guys together like we see here. And you can see I'm starting to sew that up. This will just help me identify areas that I must have missed, or just those verts were not sitting right on top of each other, so the threshold for merging them together was too small. Let's see, G, So I'll do my last command on that. Hit G like this. So I could just try also selecting these verts and then shift right click on there and go to merge vertices and do the option box and then change the threshold of that to be higher. And you can see it picked up some of those, but I think I've got some problems with the geo on this one. Yeah, something like that. So this one I'll just merge vertices to center like that, and it's starting to sew that up, but I do have a problem where I don't have geometry matching there. So I really need to go back to the original and fix that up, but again, I just don't want to do a test on this thing just to kind of see what it looks like. The other thing that we can do is we've got this geometry, and then we want to check and make sure that the textures are actually working with this thing. So we'll soften the edges again, and I'm curious as to why some of these are just staying hard edge. So sometimes I have to do this unlock normals, and then go back to soften edge, and sometimes that usually fixes some kind of issue that there might be with normals that you can see there. So I need to get some textures in here. I'm going to go to Photoshop and load up the textures that we had from the previous session and just pull them in here. So here we are inside of Photoshop, and basically these are the textures that I have. I did a little bit more work to the texture and made a little bit better looking color map, and then we have our normal map that we baked out, and also have a spec map that I took the color map and desaturated it and just played around with the levels a little bit on it. So I exported those out, and now I'm going to go over to Maya and let's import those in. Let's go to the hypershade. So let's go to Window, Rendering Editors, go to the hypershade right here and open that up, and this is where we're going to pull our textures into. First, let's go ahead and make a material. I'm just going to use a blend, and I'll call this tile test like this. And call it MAT for material. And then I can just go ahead and map the color. Let's go ahead and bring our color map in. So just click that little icon right here, and I'll pull this over. I'm going to do a 2D texture, and we need a file texture. So let's click this right here, and then now we can load this little button right here, and that will let us navigate to where we sit for things. So I'm going to go under my project, and I've got a source images directory, Targa, and then I've got my color. So I'll go ahead and open that up right there like that. And we can just middle mouse drag this thing onto our piece of geometry that you see here, and to see textures, tap 6, and now you can start to see textures on this object, and we can see that it's starting to tile correctly. I'm just going to call this COL for color, and then we can start to map this shader, what we've got going on here. So I'm going to zoom out on here. Just going to hold down Alt and zoom out like you normally would in one of these viewports like this, and so you can see we've got color hooked up. I'm going to take this and duplicate them. Just going to go Edit, Duplicate. Let's do Shading Network like this, and then I can call this, double click on it, call this Spec, and I'll do the same for this. I'll duplicate it again, Edit, Duplicate Shading Network, and double click on that and call this Norm for a normal map like that. And so let's go ahead and load up the normal map, and for this one let's double click on it and let's load the spec map right here like that. And then on the shader, I'm just going to plug these things in. I'm just going to middle mouse drag this into the bump area, and I'm going to change this from use as bump, and I'm going to change it to tangent space normals. Double click on the shader again, and I'm going to pull middle mouse drag this onto the specular color like that, and we should be able to look in the world and see what we've got going on here for the normals. I don't have a light in here. We could create a light real quick. We can go create lights, and I'm just going to do a spotlight, and I'm going to give it a pre-nubule angle of about 20, and we'll tell it to cast shadows, and we'll hit apply like that, and I can tap 7 to view my lights. If the light is selected, we can go ahead and look through it. We can middle mouse drag it into the world like that, and then zoom out and tap F and kind of view everything that we want to see for this right here like that. And let's go back to panels perspective like this, and we can also create another light in here. Just go create lights and do a point light and push this off to the side a little bit, maybe push it down, and then take the intensity and drop that way back just for a little bit of bounce light that we've got going on in here. So also for this, let's make sure we got shadows turned on. Lighting, we'll put on two-sided lighting, and we'll also turn on shadows so that light, that spotlight will actually cast shadows. And then I want to affect the shadow quality, so we've got the spotlight selected, and we can go to shadows. I'm going to bump this up to 2048 for the shadow resolution, and also change the filter size to 5, and that'll make the shadows a bit softer on here. So I do notice that this normal map that we baked out from ZBrush is really intense, and it's really harsh. So that's why I said you could kick out the geometry and you can actually bake out the normal map in another program. I'd probably only use the ZBrush normal map if I just needed something really quick and it didn't matter all that much to me. Yeah, so I just don't think it's the best normal map in the world. And if we take a look inside of Photoshop and we actually look at the normal map, you can see how harsh these values are here. So one thing I could do to tone this thing back, I could just select with an eyedropper, tap I, and then select like this neutral kind of blue and put a new layer over the top of this and say maybe like tone back like this, and I'll fill it. So I'll hit Alt Backspace to fill with this color that you see here. And now I can just change the opacity of this to kind of let it dial in and out, and maybe just knock back some of this. Again, this isn't really the proper way of doing this. I'm just trying to not rebake this thing right now just for demonstration purposes, and it, like I said, it does look a bit harsh. Actually, it looks a lot harsh. So I don't know, maybe I'll crank that up to 50. So I'll just save my Photoshop document, Control S, and then I'm going to do Control Shift S to do a save as. And then I'm going to navigate to where my Targa file is and change this to Targa. And I'll save directly over the top of the normal map that I've already got. Hit save. And do you want to replace this? Yes. Okay, we'll do that. And then we'll hop back on over to Maya. And there's a cool thing under Viewport 2.0. You can go to the option box and tell it to reload all textures. We could do that. That's one option. Or you can hit Control A. If we went to the actual shader for this, and you went to the actual texture that we had, you can do the reload right there. So you can reload individual textures, or you can reload all the textures in the scene. So that actually works a lot better. And obviously we've got a normal map on top of what we've got for actual geo. So the reason that we would do something like this, if you need this kind of fidelity and you've got a really rich scene and you want it to be a bit more realistic and you don't want to do any shader tricks, you can actually use this to make actual geo, so like your bricks and everything else like that on the walls are actually coming out. Now again, like you can see the poly count on this thing, we're already at over 17,000 tries just for this little area that we have here. So I would view this probably more of like this is going to be kind of a special case, or you know, maybe a cinematic thing. The other thing is the geo that we produced from ZBrush. Remember, we used 2,000 polys on that plane that we have here. You know, if you wanted it even lower, you could get half the poly count that we have here if each one of these things was 1,000 polys at that point. You might have to do a little bit more cleanup, which not that big of a deal, but it's just something to take into consideration, right? So I'm going to group these real quick, call these lights, and then this is all my geo right here, and I'll minimal mouse drag that up there. I just like to try to be organized with my scenes in case somebody else comes in. Then you should try to be as clean as possible with your work as well. You never know when somebody else might have to pick it up and take a look at it. So I'm going to create one more light. I'll do a point light, and we'll make this one like red or something like that, just to kind of get a cool kind of look. And then on this one, I'll hit Control A, and I'll do a quadratic fall off for the light. So you're going to have to really crank up this value for this thing. Let's try 200. That's not even enough. So 1,000. 2,000, okay, like that. So we've got a really fast fall off on this thing. Let's do something like that so it's pretty intense. I just want to see this thing kind of moving around on this surface here. And we could also take our spotlight, I'll middle mouse drag in here like this and zoom in a bit on that like this and build a pool of light. So I'll go back to panels perspective like this, and we could do our other point light, which is that kind of fill that we have here. So we could put that on quadratic as well and make that, let's make that 20,000. So you can definitely see with the changing the fall off type, you might have to really crank some of those numbers. So I'm just curious as to what this would look like in a more like a, I don't know, some kind of like dungeon environment or something like that, you know. So it could be definitely a cool effect, right? All right, I'll go ahead and push this back up in here and just tap 5, then 6, so you can see what we're looking at here. If you want to look at the lights, just tap 7. And I think that will be enough for this section for taking a look at tiling geometry that we've pushed over from ZBrush.